Imagine climbing to 14,000 feet, not to summit a peak, not to escape a predator, but to eat moths. Not just a few moths, millions of them, every summer, deep in the alpine zones of Glacier National Park, the Shoshone National Forest, and the wild backcountry of Alaska. Some of North America's most powerful predators make a journey that scientists are still trying to fully understand. Grizzly bears, 800 pounds of muscle and instinct, are abandoning the valleys and climbing into the high country. And the reason? A tiny insect the size of your thumbnail is changing everything we thought we knew about what a grizzly bear eats, how far it travels, and what happens when humans show up at the dinner table. Today on Scape News, we're going up the mountain. The Rocky Mountain West is one of the last places on Earth where grizzly bears still roam in significant numbers. In the continental United States, fewer than 2,000 grizzlies survive, most of them concentrated in the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, the Northern Rockies, and the wild river systems that feed into them. Grizzly bears are hyperphagic machines. In the months before hibernation, their entire biological drive is to eat, and eat a lot. We're talking about consuming up to 20,000 calories per day to build the fat reserves they need to survive a winter underground. For decades, biologists assumed grizzlies did this the obvious way: salmon in Alaska, white bark pine nuts in the Rockies, ground squirrels, berries, roots, and yes, all of that is true. But there's a chapter in the grizzly summer diet that went largely unnoticed for years. A secret stash, hidden above the tree line, that researchers are now calling one of the most significant caloric events in a grizzly's entire year. It involves millions of insects, and it's happening right now. Meet Yuxo auxiliaris, the army cutworm moth. You've probably never heard of it, but if you were a grizzly bear living in the Northern Rockies, this moth would be the most important creature in your entire summer. Here's what makes the army cutworm moth so special. Every spring, these moths emerge in the Great Plains, from fields as far east as Nebraska and Kansas, and they fly west, thousands of feet upward, into the alpine zones of the Rockies. They're escaping the summer heat, hiding in the cool darkness between the rocks of talus and scree fields, waiting out the hottest months of the year. And while they're hiding, they're gorging on wildflower nectar, building up fat reserves, getting very, very plump. A single army cutworm moth contains roughly half a calorie of pure fat. Half a calorie. That sounds like nothing until you realize what research at Glacier National Park discovered. A single grizzly bear can eat up to 40,000 moths in a single day. 40,000. Let that sink in. That's roughly 20,000 calories from moths alone in a single day, without catching a single fish, without eating a single berry. Just a bear. The scientific research on grizzly bear moth feeding began in earnest in Glacier National Park in the 1990s, and what biologists discovered fundamentally changed how we model grizzly bear nutrition. Army cutworm moths aren't just calorie-dense. They're up to 70% fat by dry body weight. That's a higher fat content than almost anything else a grizzly can find in a Rocky Mountain summer. Higher than most berries. Comparable to salmon, and unlike salmon, which requires a bear to be near a river at the right time during a very specific run. Moths are predictable, abundant, and they don't swim away. Researchers use a combination of field observation, GPS collar tracking, and stable isotope analysis of bear hair to determine just how significant moths are in the grizzly diet. The isotope work was particularly revealing because carbon from Great Plains wildflowers, where the moths feed during spring migration, has a distinct chemical signature that shows up directly in grizzly tissue when the bears consume those moths. In other words, scientists would look at a grizzly bear's hair and trace the food chain all the way back to a Nebraska wheat field. That's how connected these ecosystems are. The moths aggregate at specific elevations, typically between 9 and 12,000 feet, in scree and talus fields that face north or east. These are the coolest, most sheltered faces of the mountain. The bears that exploit these sites most effectively are often larger, healthier individuals who have the energy and experience to make the climb and the knowledge of where to go. It's a reminder that what we call wildlife behavior is often really just intelligence, pattern recognition, memory, strategy, passed from mother to cub, season after season, for generations. Now here's where the story gets complicated, because human beings have also discovered these alpine scree fields, and we've been showing up without an invitation. Andy Pills, a wildlife biologist with the Shoshone National Forest in Wyoming, has spent years studying how human access to grizzly bear moth feeding sites is affecting bear behavior. His findings are sobering. The problem is straightforward. These moth aggregation sites are, by coincidence, also extremely attractive to backcountry hikers, rock climbers, and off-trail adventurers. Dramatic talus fields at high elevation, that's a destination. That's a peak bagger's dream. And as outdoor recreation has exploded in the American West, more and more people are arriving at these remote, high-altitude locations. When people show up at a moth feeding site, even briefly, bears leave. They have to. A grizzly that's been conditioned to avoid humans will abandon a feeding site the moment human scent or activity is detected. And returning later isn't always an option. The moth aggregation window is short. The summer season at altitude is brief. A bear that loses days of feeding to human disturbance loses fat. It enters winter thinner. Its cubs, if it's a mother, are weaker. The Shoshone National Forest research found that even relatively low levels of human activity, we're talking about a handful of hikers per week at a given site, can be enough to reduce bear use of that site significantly. And unlike a river corridor where a bear might be displaced by 100 yards, an alpine scree field is the feeding site. There's no comparable alternative up the next ridge. The management challenge this creates is real. How do you close access to alpine terrain that isn't obviously marked as sensitive wildlife habitat? How do you explain to a hiker standing on a scree field that their presence is starving a grizzly bear? And how do you enforce closures at 12,000 feet when ranger resources are already stretched thin? These are the questions that wildlife managers across the Northern Rockies are wrestling with right now. And they don't have easy answers. To fully understand what's at stake in the Rockies, it helps to zoom out, way out, and look at the grizzly bear story from above. Alaska is home to roughly 32,000 brown and grizzly bears, more than twice the entire population in the lower 48 states. From the air, the scale of bear country in Alaska is staggering. River systems that stretch for hundreds of miles, tundra that runs unbroken to the horizon, mountain ranges without a road, a trail, or a power line as far as any drone camera can see. Aerial reconnaissance has become a critical tool for wildlife biologists in Alaska, allowing researchers to survey bear populations, map habitat use, and monitor movement corridors across terrain that would be impossible to cover on foot. What aerial surveys reveal is both inspiring and instructive. Alaska's brown bears don't face the same level of human pressure at alpine feeding sites that their counterparts in the lower 48 do. The sheer scale of the landscape provides a buffer. But even in Alaska, the patterns are similar. Bears climb in summer. Bears aggregate at calorie-dense food sources. Bears travel farther than most people assume to reach the resources they need. What Alaska teaches us is what the Rockies could still be and what could be lost when a landscape is large enough, intact enough, and wild enough. Grizzly bears are extraordinarily capable of finding and exploiting the resources they need. They are not fragile. They are not dependent on any one food source. They are generalists in the truest sense, opportunistic, intelligent, adaptable, but they are not infinitely tolerant of us. And in the lower 48, where every square mile of bear habitat is contested, where every trailhead is a potential conflict point, where the margin between a healthy bear and a dead bear can come down to a single interaction with human. The stakes are very different. Alaska shows us what's possible. The Rockies remind us what's required to get there. So where does this leave us? The Army Cutworm moth story is, in miniature, the story of grizzly bear conservation in the 21st century. It's a story about ecological complexity, about how an 800-pound predator's survival can depend on the migration pattern of a half-inch insect born in a Nebraska cornfield. It's a story about how much we still don't know, and how quickly things can unravel when we disturb the pieces we don't yet understand. Climate change is already altering the equation. Warmer temperatures are shifting the timing of moth migrations, changing when and where aggregations form, and potentially disrupting the synchrony between moth availability and bear hyperphagia cycles. A bear that arrives at a scree field to find no moths is a bear with fewer calories and fewer options. At the same time, researchers are working on better tools. GPS tracking with finer resolution, automated wildlife cameras at known feeding sites, predictive models that can help land managers anticipate where bears will go and close those areas to human access before the conflicts begin. Public education is part of the solution, too. The hiker who steps onto a scree field at 12,000 feet and disturbs a feeding grizzly isn't a villain. They almost certainly don't know what they're standing on. Awareness is a first step to stewardship. The grizzly bear survived the Ice Age. It survived the fur trade. It survived a century of extermination campaigns that reduced its range by 98%. It is, in the most literal sense, a survivor. But survival has always required the right conditions. Space, food, peace. The Army cutworm moth is a reminder that nature's ledger is more intricate than we imagine, that the threads connecting one ecosystem to another run through unexpected creatures in unexpected places, and that protecting a grizzly bear might mean protecting a scree field you've never heard of, in a mountain range you've never visited, for a moth you couldn't identify, in a lineup. That's the deal, and it's a deal worth making. If you made it here, thank you, genuinely. This stuff matters, and the fact that you're curious about it matters too. If you learned something today, hit that subscribe button and join us at YT Time Scape News, where every video is a deep dive into the natural world's best-kept secrets. Drop a comment below. Had you ever heard of Army cutworm moths before today? I want to know. Until next time, stay curious, stay wild, and keep looking up. And as always, be safe.